In the last few sessions, we have looked at the fact that Daniel purposed in his heart that he wasn't going to defile his own body. And then we saw that God gave him favour with the chief eunuch. So this is a person who could actually decide if Daniel's request to not eat the king's food and the king's wine was going to get honoured. Now, we're going to have a look at this next passage, and we're going to see it wasn't just as easy as Daniel made a decision not to defile his body and God gave him favour with the chief eunuch. There was still a little bit more work that Daniel needed to do. So let's read this next passage and see what we can learn. So let's turn to Daniel chapter 1, verse 10. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord, the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your face looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king. Now, the reality is, I think the chief eunuch's fear here was quite valid. We're not even to the next couple of chapters where we see that Nebuchadnezzar is quite willing to kill a whole lot of people for a whole pile of different reasons. So when we see the accounts that even Daniel recorded, we can imagine that there is a whole pile more accounts that haven't been recorded. We know that Nebuchadnezzar went into Judah and seized them all. So this, I think, is a very valid fear and a very valid concern that the chief eunuch has. So let's have a look at what Daniel responds. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacy. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants. So he consented with them in this matter and tested them 10 days. Did you notice in this section, Daniel turns around and says, test us for 10 days and then do as you see fit. So he's put his request forward. He has sat there and he's gone, okay, I am pretty convinced that God's going to come through. Well, that's my assumption, having a look at this read. And Daniel's like, just try giving us vegetables, giving us water, and then test our appearance. But we're going to respect that we are your servants. We're going to respect the position that we're in. And afterwards, after you've examined us, do what sees fit. And I think that's quite important is sometimes we're not willing to accept our position. But here, Daniel gives us a really good example of even though he'd purposed in his heart, even though he was like, I can't eat this, and he saw that God gave him favour, he's like, okay, I'm going to put an idea forward. I'm going to put forward a proposal, and then I'm going to leave it up to the chief eunuch. I'm going to leave it up to the person in charge to do as they see fit, because I'm their servant. Now let's read and see what happens next. And at the end of the 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacy. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but we seem to live in a day and age where we are obsessed with food and diet plans, and there's so much research, there's so much money spent into studying how our body responds to food. So obviously, being that that's the culture we're in, I've actually spent a bit of time reading some of these different research, and I'm personally really not surprised that their features looked better, because we know that if we drink water, it helps our body flush things out. We know that if we have a huge amount of wine, our skin kind of goes that grey and pale. We also know that our body needs vegetables to repair and to restore and just for overall health. So whether Daniel, when he put this proposal forward, already knew that, because we know from the beginning of Daniel that he was a wise man. He was young, but he was also wise. He was in this training house of training under the ways of the Chaldeans. But in Judah, he was either from the king's line or the noble line. So whether he already knew this information that our bodies need water and our bodies need vegetables, or if it was the fact that he'd just grown up on a different diet and then he's having all this rich, he's seeing them have all this rich food, maybe he never ate it. And he's just like, well, you know what? I know that if we have the vegetables, our skins are going to be a bit brighter. So for me, I don't find it hard to believe that eating some more vegetables and drinking some more water made their skin plumper. Do I think that this is turning around and saying that that's the diet that we should follow today? No. Because when we turn over to the New Testament and we see Peter's vision of the sheep coming down and all the food, and God's telling him, go eat, and he's like, but I've never eaten this stuff. This stuff is against the law. The law tells us not to eat it. And God is like, don't call unclean what I have cleaned. So in that, I do believe God gave us permission to eat meat and to eat all different types of it. But here is a clear example of how eating vegetables and drinking water is also a good thing for our body. And there is so much research around that. So for me, I think it's a balance. Daniel, in this particular circumstance, decided that eating the food from the king's table would be defiling his body. But I don't think that is something for us today to say, hey, we have to only eat vegetables and water. I think when we look at Peter's vision, there is good enough reason to say, hey, we're free to eat all different types of food. And here we can see that there is wisdom in making sure that we consume enough vegetables and enough water. So now let's continue reading and see what the next verse says. Thus the steward took away their portion of the delicacy and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables. Can't imagine Daniel would have been very popular in that house with the others going, hey, we've now just lost our wine and the king's delicacy food. But have a look how God rewards Daniel. As for these 4 young men, so the 4 young men is Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These are the 4 that we've already been told about their name change a little earlier in the chapter as well. God gave them knowledge and skill in all literacy and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So there we have it. God rewarded Daniel in being obedient of not defiling his body. God gave them extra wisdom to all 4 of them. He gave them extra knowledge. And to Daniel, he gave understanding of all visions and dreams. So that was a gift that God gave them, a gift from God. So I really like having a look at this sort of outline. Daniel purpose, God gave favor, then Daniel still had to negotiate for it. And then in the negotiation, his skin was better. He passed the test. And then God poured out more. And I'm not trying to say that I think it's we do something so God rewards it. I think God loves his children and wants to give rewards. He wants to give gifts. But it's not a cause and effect of, hey, God, I do this, so now you have to do that for me. No, he's still God. We're not. I'm just outlining this particular circumstance, what happened in this particular one of the steps that happened.